Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Way of Wade Shadow 6. And thanks to Way of Wade for sending me a pair of these. Check out. However, as always, video is not sponsored. All opinions, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. And that being said, these are, to me, a little bit of a different take on the Shadow line. Pretty interesting, the way these kind of came out. Some very, very unique space and weight-saving elements in these that I was not expecting to see in this line of shoe, that I definitely think could be a little bit of a blueprint for shoes kind of going forward to get containment as well as weight reduction. Let's get into them. Now, like I said, starting off in the uppers, obviously in the Shadow line, we always get a lot of mesh, and that is no different in these. As you can see, that the gusset does come up pretty high on the tongue. The tongue really isn't too padded. You get a little bit of padding here in the more proximal aspect of the tongue, but then kind of going down, it is more of just, you know, kind of multi-layered mesh, and that's what kind of connects the whole thing. Even the strobo board is mesh. You do get quite a bit of bunting and padding coming around the ankle collar, and you do get a runner's knot in these. However, the lockdown on them is just fine without the runner's knot. I had zero heel slippage even without the runner's knot, and honestly, using the runner's knot, I did get quite a bit of lace irritation that I had to get the runner's knot out of there. Because a lot of times if there's a runner's knot, I like to play one shoe with the runner's knot, one shoe without it, just to see what the difference is. And since there was no heel slippage, and because I have a little bit of a higher arched foot, I have a high volume anterior ankle, front part of my ankle, I tend to get lace irritation kind of the quickest out of any foot type. And so I just took it out and really had zero problem. So I would say unless you're a flat-footed player, you don't necessarily need the runner's knot, or you can just throw some moleskin under there. The one thing is, you go into the lace line. Number one, there is some cabling for the lace line. You do get some reinforcement in that runner's knot area, as well as the second most proximal lace eyelet. But then in the forefoot, you get this kind of gray tab. That gray tab goes all the way around the forefoot of the shoe, encases the forefoot of the shoe, and then goes all the way laterally into that other gray tab, into the other lace eyelet. So in the forefoot of the shoe, there's like this harness, right, that just gives so much stability there without having to bulk the shoe up. It really is just a thicker piece of paneling under there, right? It's not uncomfortable by any means. It's really an interesting way, you know, when you're tying down the shoe to really kind of lock in the forefoot of that shoe. Speaking of, look at the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper on that forefoot. The burr does not get through that waxy drag guard layer. So, you know, like I said, in terms of durability, I mean, they have got a little bit of exposed boom foam, but that's really it. Also, look at these things on the breathability test. They only heat it up 102.2 degrees. That's what you'd expect from something like this. I mean, I had the heat gun on here, and it was hotter on the outside than it was on the inside. I mean, heat was blowing out of this thing. So, you know, you see why. Look at the breathability mapping. Fog just blowing out of everywhere the second I put the fog machine in this. So really, in terms of that, it's kind of the same as other Shadow shoes, and in terms of, you know, all the breathability. It's just on these ones, a lot of elements in these just create more stability with less material, and really no place is that more evident than here in the rear foot. Now, I know this big X here looks like window dressing. It's not. So it complements the internal heel counter, but then there's just this one line of TPU that goes from the medial heel all the way around into the forefoot, snakes around the forefoot of the shoe. Now, this is flexible enough that the shoe doesn't feel super stiff, but it's just enough right in the right area, right, to keep the shoe stable. Like I said, it's not a lot of material. It's pretty low profile. It's pretty minimalist, but it still does do an outsized job in terms of containment. Especially, I felt zero instability in these. I felt zero, really, you know, like I wanted to push through the outside of the shoe. Like I said, small amount of material doing an outsized job. Now, getting into the midsole teardown, I really like this shank. Number one, it comes up on the medial side of the shoe to give you a little bit more of actually arch support on there, but then it also sends some fingers into the forefoot of the shoe, some little leaflets in there for a springboard effect, and it actually starts in the heel, so it does cross two zones. After that, it's just a full bed of boom foam, and it's actually textured boom foam under there. I mean, maybe you get a little bit more feel if you take the insole out, but other than that, I think it's just a stamping on there. Like I said, netted strobo. If you look at these things on the balance height test, 38 centimeters in the rear foot, 41 in the forefoot. And yeah, I mean, like I said, it's more the shank doing, to me, a lot of the work in this shoe in terms of the feeling of snap and launch, is quick launch in these. Yeah, boom foam does feel very responsive, but at least to me in this, the feeling of kind of the arch cradling as well as a little bit more of the snap in the forefoot, to me that's a combination of the longer shank as well as the little harness there in the forefoot. All right, but getting into the outsole tread, this is two separate pods that's coupled together by some pretty flat rubber, and then there's also a lot of flat rubber in the forefoot, which I thought it was pretty interesting. Other than that, it is kind of just a splatter pattern on this. It's very thin rubber, and then on the medial side, you do get some like actual gridding there, right? Like some, triangular, almost squares made of just broken up triangles. The thing is this tread has micro gridding on it as well, which means every piece of tread also has, a little bit of a grid stamped into it for even more traction. To be honest, this was really surprisingly sure-footed traction. On the grip test ramp, it slips at 40 degrees, which is pretty good. Not a ton of rubber movement on the viewing box, but like I said, it's thin rubber. Thing is, the durometer comes in at a 19. It's not soft rubber. This is not wimpy rubber by any means. And just having all that flat rubber in the forefoot kind of roll off of, right? It does have a pretty bulky lateral flange. I mean, it's not sharp, but it is just bulked out with rubber, right? It kind of juts out from the outsole. It's really substantial. Then it kind of juts in there in the midfoot, so it's not, it's a little more low profile. Look at this thing on the speed ratio though. Comes in at a 2.83, then a shank score of 0.3 brings that up to a 3.13. And I do think it deserves to be there because I said these are snappy shoes, especially getting up and down the court, like coast to coast, especially on outdoor courts. Right, the boom foam, and then a little bit more protection from that bottom-loaded shank. These things haul on most courts, and the micro gridding for the indoor courts, gives you enough stopping power on these. It really didn't slip out one bit at all in these. The grip was incredibly sure-footed. It did pick up dust, kind of in dirt, like they, you do wipe them down, but even with the dust and dirt on them, I didn't really have any slippage. And then as soon as I wiped it down, it was fine. This is that kind of new rubber we're seeing from Leaning and Way of Wade, where it's, you're getting all that grip, but also it's lasting a lot more. We've started to see this on more and more shoes, and I kind of think this is where outsole rubber science is going, where you can get a tread pattern on it that looks like it would never hold up on an outdoor court that will hold up just fine. I mean, these things are meant for both indoors and outdoors. You look at these things on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, and basically the burr just shines the rubber. That's it. So yeah, I think indoors and outdoors, they're just fine. And honestly, they perform incredibly similarly, even with more unforgiving courts, slick paint, blacktop, or kind of coming in here to hardwood or vinyl. Yeah, just fine. All right, so let's get into the fit of the Shockwave 6. This was actually pretty interesting. They do have an 11-degree inflare, which isn't crazy, but it is distal in the shoe. So most of the shoe is actually straight, and it really just inflares the distal tip of the shoe. And then in terms of the length, comes in at 28.6 centimeters in length, 9.5 centimeters of metatarsal width, 10 centimeters of toe box width, and then a 29-degree taper. So they're not incredibly long shoes, and they're not incredibly wide in the toe box. The metatarsal width is actually decent. It's just in the toe box is where it kind of tapers in there. I would say a narrow and a medium foot. I think you just go true to size on these things. If you want to go up a half size, if you're a medium, they're short enough for one size you can. If you just want more room, I guess a 2E, I'd say just go up, a half to one size on these, like I said, because they are short. And that way, if you want more room in the toe box, you've got, like I said, they lock down so well. You definitely can do that. A 4E, I'd probably be going up one size on these things, like I said, because they're a little bit shorter. If you are a 2E and you want to break these in true to size, you can. I didn't really have too much of a problem breaking these in. I had a little bit of cramping, and then I did break these in pretty easily just because, like I said, the uppers are pretty malleable with all that textile mesh. So it kind of just depends. Do you want a little bit more room in there? Do you want a little bit more of a roomy fit? Do you want more of a performance fit? That's kind of, you should go there. In terms of the snake bitten foot, yeah, I mean, like I said, they're pretty protective, especially for more medial pain, more arch pain, arch strain. This shank does a fantastic job with that. Forefoot pain, ball of foot pain, hallux limitus, arthritis, things like that. They also do a fantastic job for, and they will lock down an orthotic. I will say, with a bulkier orthotic, something that's pushing you up into the shoe, up into the lace line of the shoe, you probably will want to put a little bit of moleskin under the tongue to make it a little more comfortable. But other than that, they lock an orthotic down fine. And in terms of an entire bed of boom foam with a molded shank, they're pretty insulating, they're pretty forgiving for most things. And in terms of the performance of the Shadow 6, yeah, I mean, like I said, up and down the court, coast to coast, They were absolutely fantastic. These were a really sneaky good combo indoor-outdoor pickleball shoe too, because they just are so consistent on both indoors and outdoor courts, and they just have so much snap to them, right? Like for pickleball, do you really need that full-length shank that's giving you a ton? No, but it does give you a lot of pop, right? You know, it more like, to me, the molded part of the shank in the arch is more of the benefit to pickleball, and kind of how the shoe moves back and forth, and kind of how those two tread pods bend. That's the more beneficial thing for pickleball, but it remains the same that in terms of quick pivoting, kind of hard cutting movements for basketball, step backs are fantastic in these. Kind of any one-footed type movement, these things are just so sure-footed when you are just on one foot, putting all your weight on one foot, especially if you're in an awkward position. I think that's where these things shine. That's why I think they do so well. Number one for coast to coast, kind of getting up for layups over and over again, but also kind of short court movement as well as pickleball, just because, like I said, they are so sure-footed and just so easy to snap up from one leg. So love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I certainly liked the Shadow 6s much more than the Shadow 5, Shadow 5 V2. I definitely think this was a clear step up, and also kind of a step sideways, right? This is just a different shoe than those, and mostly like in good ways. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you do want to see, Way of Wade just updated the Way of Wade 11, the signature, Wade model in the line. If you do want to see the differences between that new updated Way of Wade 11 and the original that just came out a few months ago, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect, rubber, and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the sneakerverse.